Dear students, while discussing the relationship between research questions and research designs, we discussed about various extraneous factors which are to be avoided. We must be planning very strategically, very carefully, so that our data is not contaminated. As extraneous factors are there in the research field to contaminate our data, we must be aware of the extraneous factors. In this session, we are going to talk about history and maturation as extraneous factors and their potentiality to disrupt our data and to contaminate our data. So, history and maturation, these are two possible factors which may influence our data, and they may be making some changes on our dependent variable, right? And therefore, these may be potential extraneous factors, right? So how they are extraneous factors? Let me give you some examples. When we are making sure that our dependent variable of the study or variables, if more than one, they are influenced only by independent variables, right? So in this case, if there is some time period involved, for example, if our study is 6 to 7 months or maybe 1 year, if it's a longitudinal study, so this time gap in between is historical changes which are taking place outside the research. They may be influencing our dependent variable. Or maturation. Maturation means like when our subject, with the passage of time, and particularly when it's a longer time duration study, they are getting matured and their knowledge is increased. That's going to be increased with the passage of time. So in this case, history and maturation, they can also influence the behavior of the dependent variable, right? So therefore, these two factors could be potential extraneous factors, right? So whatever event which is taking place outside the study in different points in time, if that is bringing in any change in the behavior of the subject, which is our dependent variable, then that is the contamination created by history or the influence created by history, right? In longitudinal studies, as already discussed, there is maximum possibility of the history as a time period to influence the behavior of our subject. For example, you want to work on the second language learning of young learners, and you want to teach them through a particular methodology, right? So that particular methodology is your independent variable, right? And their learning is your dependent variable, right? So in this case, when you want to make sure that the change in the improvement of their second language is only because of the teaching methodology. So it is a longitudinal study. So in between, they may be getting some increase in their knowledge. They may be enhancing their exposure to the second language one way or the others, right? So in this case, it's not only because of your given treatment, your teaching methodology, but this is because of the historical time frame which is taking place, right? So we are there to plan strategically, very carefully, in such a way that the history as an extraneous factor is avoided, right? It's very natural that in a society the time is going on and lots of events are taking place outside the experiment, right? So those outside events, they may be, as part of the history, they may be influencing our study. And of course, there are some physical changes in the personality of the subject, learners in this example, right? So they may also be, getting matured physically, mentally, psychologically. So these changes which are taking place inside their personality, they may be influencing, the data, right? So that is to be controlled some way or the other through careful, analysis. And our results are to be made as maximum as possible pure and free of these contamination. So history is an extraneous factor, and it is related to the external events which are going on. And the example, another example is that if you administered a pre-test, right, from your subject, and then you are to take the post-test after, let's say, 1 year times. So whatever is taking place in the society outside as history may be influencing your result of the subject in post-test, right? So that is one possibility, and we are to control it as maximum as possible, and that's the influence which is to be stopped. Maturation, on the other hand, as an extraneous factor, is related to the internal factors of the learners or subjects. And it's again a natural process because as discussed earlier, our subject, they are getting physically, emotionally, cognitively matured with the passage of time, right? So their influence of this maturation process would also and may also influence the results, right? For maturation, again, it's the same example if the L2 learners who are young learners and they are taught through a specific methodology, right? And in the meanwhile, like when they are getting matured, it is not necessarily only and only the treatment or the experiments which are conducted with the learners through the specific methodology. So that's not the only independent variable which is affecting our dependent variable, the improvement in the language, the second language of the learners. Okay, so in this case we must be taking care of this maturation as an extraneous factor, and we must be planning and very carefully we must be making sure that our data is free from any sort of contamination, any sort of influence. And history and maturation, particularly in longitudinal studies, they are potential extraneous factors which are to be avoided by careful researchers.